Creativity and community are absolutely vital in challenging times. Welcome to Syncreate, a show where we explore the intersections between creativity, psychology, and spirituality. We believe everyone has the capacity to create. Our goal is to demystify the process and expand the boundaries of what it means to be creative. We talk with visionaries and change makers and everyday creatives working in a wide range of fields and media, from the arts to science, technology, and business. We aim to illuminate the creative process from imagination to innovation and everything in between. I'm Melinda Rothaus, and I help individuals and organizations bring their dreams and visions to life. At Syncreate, we're here to support your creative endeavors. So if you have an idea for a project or a new venture and you're not quite sure how to get it off the ground, find us at syncreate.org. Our book, also called Syncreate, walks you through the stages of the creative process so you can take action on your goals. We also offer resources, creative process tools, and coaching to help you bring your work to the world. My guest today is Dr. AZA Allsop. He's an MD, PhD from Harvard and MIT. He's a neuroscientist and neo-fusion musician who studies music mindfulness, psychedelics, and social cognition. He is assistant professor of psychiatry at both Yale and Howard University. And he combines art, science, and community to redefine culture and make social impact. Okay, welcome, Dr. AZA. It's great to have you on the show. Finally, we've been talking about it for a while.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm happy to be here and to get to talk to you.
Yeah, me too. And so we originally connected a couple years ago through a mutual colleague, Dr. Jeff Mims, who I've also had on the show. And so great to circle back with you now. And I know we have a lot of great things to touch on today. But first, just to kind of introduce people to what you do in your research. So you're a musician and a neuroscientist, researcher, and you study music mindfulness. And so for people who maybe, or that's one of the things you study, I should say, of many. But so for people who may not be familiar, like what is music mindfulness and how is it different from just listening to music or practicing mindfulness?
Yeah, for sure. So music mindfulness is this idea that we can combine components of either music listening or active music making with different kinds of mindfulness practices. And there are a number of different protocols and sort of models that one can use. And in our lab, we've developed, a few different paradigms, but as a very sort of broad, big picture, that's the idea. And so on one hand, it's different from just music listening or music making because there's a certain level of intention and awareness of a particular cognitive or emotional state that the participant and the facilitator, if it's a facilitated sort of model, are bringing to that encounter, and that activates different regions of the brain, even if you're still listening to the same music.
Okay.
Similarly with mindfulness, mindfulness in silence activates different circuits than mindfulness with sound. And obviously, the kind of sound and the patterns of that sound, frequencies, all those things will modulate the brain in different ways. And so we think that with music mindfulness, we are getting aspects of the same brain networks that we get with music. We're getting some aspects of the same brain networks that we get with mindfulness, but we're also really activating unique pathways in the brain. And we think we can leverage this for therapeutic value, but also to bridge, social gaps and make social connection.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, so I know a big part of your work is also kind of social cognition and social connection, specifically through music and mindfulness. So, yeah, I'm curious, like, kind of what directions your research is taking. You run a lab that looks into all of this, and so like, I don't know, what's top of mind for you in terms of this research and
Yeah.
kind of where you're going with it?
Well, I think I'm really excited about the work that we're doing because I think we're starting to come to a place in the development of music therapeutics and music medicine, where we can have something that can be a first line treatment with things
Yeah.
like anxiety and depression and certain components of dementia, pain. There's so many different parameters. And what I think is exciting about this from the standpoint of uh, a medical doctor is the idea that we can now target specific biology with aspects of sound and mindfulness and psychedelics as well. And so what we're seeing is that in these different paradigms, especially in social and group contexts, we're able to create synchrony between brains, synchrony between nervous systems, and we can see decreases in anxiety, decreases in people's subjective report of things like depression. We finished a pilot study that we published last year, where we showed that a music mindfulness protocol that combines a facilitator with a live musician and certain soundscapes that we created in the lab to help drive certain parts of the nervous system in just 2 weeks can have a meaningful effect on people's own self-report of distress and anxiety and social connection. And so, and not only that, but we can see that even just within 5 minutes of participating in this musical mindfulness paradigm in the community, we can see changes in heart rate variability. We can see changes in the EEG that are different from baseline and different than when they're just doing mindfulness alone. And so
Interesting.
we're really interested in sort of the next phase of this study in which we can, show like, well, what happens after 8 weeks? Can we have like meaningful effects on clinical outcomes of anxiety and depression? And our guess is that, our hypothesis is that we can because we're targeting these parts of the biology. Another really cool study that we're doing along the same line is our drum circle study, where we've been studying, group drumming in different cities in the US and showing that not only can we reduce things like state anxiety with group drumming, but we can really entrain the nervous system and facilitate parasympathetic activity, part of the nervous system that helps us to relax and to heal in these group settings. And so I think it's really exciting for us to really not do something that is super new from the standpoint of like we know that music can heal. Our ancestors
Sure.
have been drumming in groups for a long time, but now we're actually getting into the biology and being able to make it really precise for clinical indications.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And I was about to say the same thing. It's like we all kind of know intuitively, right? That feeling of like how music can support mood or we go to a concert and everyone kind of gets into that synchrony and that kind of flow state between the musicians and the audience. But this is like, taking it a step further and specifically kind of using it for healing and these kind of
Yeah.
things.
And
Yeah,
the idea is that, we by understanding the mechanism from a biological perspective, we're able to maybe leverage some of that understanding to develop these tools from a clinical perspective. Um, but as you know, like I don't think that these these systems only work at a biological level. I think there's
right.
multiple levels, spiritual, psychological, and we're trying to ask like, can we come up with tools that are really integrative so that we are able to show you mechanistically we can affect the biology, but we can also affect, people psychologically and spiritually as well. In
Yeah,
all in the effort of healing.
absolutely. Yeah, both on the individual and the group level, sounds
Yeah,
like.
particularly on the group level,
Yeah.
particularly group level.
That's amazing. So, I know you yourself are a musician, you have an album coming out soon, and I was curious, I don't know if you get to talk about this as much, I guess it depends on the context, but I'm curious, given your roots in Trinidad, which has such a rich musical tradition, I'm curious how kind of your growing up and your exposure to those musical traditions, like how it informs both your own music and your research.
Yeah, I mean, music was always a really central part of my life growing up, just like my not only, national culture from the standpoint of Trinidad, but even,
Mhm.
um, once, I moved to the United States with my family and we were living in places like New York, where, um, just such a rich culture of music. But my immediate family as well, like my dad is a multi-instrumentalist, my mom is a singer. And so music was always a part. And so there was like the cultural music coming from that part of the world, calypso, soca, reggae, big influences. But then, gospel music, soul music, and then, coming up in my time, hip hop, R&B, neo soul. So all of these different genres and expressions of our music have been pivotal, in my own genesis as a musician. And my first exposures really playing were in church,
Yeah.
and learning sort of about music from that spiritual perspective. And then as I got older, I learned the theory and, went to college, played in combos and all those things. But it's always kind of been built on that foundation. And as I became sort of deeper into the science, and particularly as I became a psychiatrist and
Mhm.
saw not only that there was just a huge gap and a need, but that we could use things like music to fill some of those gaps in ways that could actually be really impactful. It really started to even change what I was doing as an artist, and really all the things we're learning about how, again, this music can affect the nervous system. I started bringing into my shows. In fact, my last project in some ways is really a documentation of that process, in real time. And how do we bring these different elements of chord structure and of narrative into a collective space, to facilitate people's healing journeys.
Yeah, beautiful. So that brings up like a few different questions for me. I'm curious, maybe tell us a little bit about your album that's coming out, but also when you perform live, and I've experienced this, um, you know, it's not just like a performance, right? It's like a a collective experience.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so, the project is called Unmasked, and it was recorded live at Firehouse Studios in New Haven, which is a great venue, on Halloween.
Nice.
And it was this idea that like we wear so many masks to cover who we are, to keep ourselves safe.
Mhm.
And part of what we can do in this process of unmasking and being authentic and true to who we are in community, as a collective, that there's something really powerful and freeing and healing in that. And it really took this idea of music for the collective. And this is a project that we started at the beginning of 2025. We debuted it at the Kennedy Center, and it was like amazing experience. But it's this idea that not only are we bringing people together for music, but the audience is a part of the program.
Definitely.
They're a part of it. They are co-creators of the experience, and so they sing with us. They play percussions with us, and really having them drop into the experience not as a passive listener, but as an active, co-creator. And so in this project, we recorded everything live. It is as it was, and
Yeah.
kinda hear everything, but you can also hear the audience singing along, and you can hear those moments of real community, with some of the original songs that, kind of created the space and the atmosphere for that engagement. So we're really excited about it. We'll have a album release, listening party here in DC, and just, start really pushing and performing that music that a lot of it we've been performing with my trio and quartet over the last year. But we'll be really pushing it, forward this year.
Awesome, awesome. Well, when that comes out, let us know and we'll put a link.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. I'm excited for that. So, I'm curious, speaking of kind of this notion of like collective healing and social connection, things like that. Obviously, we're living in very divisive and turbulent times. So this is a question that's like really on my mind a lot. Like how can we make a positive contribution to the world through our creative efforts? And so, like, how do you see this kind of music, mindfulness, social connection, like coming together in terms of like positive social change?
Yeah. So this idea of depolarization, I think, is really important for us right now.
Mhm.
Do we and and it's not to demonize polarization, because it's the other part of the pole. It's the part of the spectrum. Like, we need polarization and we need depolarization.
Yeah.
Now, we can push these processes to their extreme. And I don't think that that is the right course of action either. But I think we have to just understand that when you bring different organisms together, when you bring even the same species together in a space as a system, there will be these moments of polarization and depolarization within systems at every level, that we can look at scientifically. We see this sort of process. And
Yeah.
so I think that tools like music, like mindfulness, like psychedelics can be really important in balancing out what we see right now, right? There are many drivers for polarization.
Yeah.
At the same time, we're also weakening the tools we have for depolarization. And that's what has led to some of this extremity.
Yeah.
And so I think the more that we can understand that we do actually have to now, as a species, engage more actively and more intentionally and more rapidly in this process of depolarization if we're going to survive what we have created,
Yeah.
then we can then leverage things like music and mindfulness and psychedelics to facilitate that process for us. And we do see that literally when I bring people together and I have them, doing music mindfulness, I am literally bringing their nervous systems into greater synchrony.
Yes.
So they are
Yes.
quite literally now vibrating closer to the same frequency,
Uh-huh.
right? The same rate, even in terms of the actual neurons and what they're doing. And
Yeah.
so it's really powerful biologically, putting them within a space where maybe because there's greater biological synchrony, it creates and facilitates an environment where there can be greater cognitive synchrony. Or even when there's still cognitive dissonance, the way that we manage that can be very different when we've gotten to a place of biological synchrony or even at a deeper level, spiritual synchrony.
Yes.
So, and so I see that these tools really can facilitate this process. And I think we are at a place now where it's necessary. So my lab is trying to understand mechanistically, how does this work?
Yeah.
And how do we leverage that to create models that communities and groups can use to facilitate that process? And that
Yeah.
some success, early success, but I think we're having success in figuring this out.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's been said so many times how music is kind of like a universal language, and it can bring people together in ways that, just simply words or maybe verbal dialogue, it goes to a deeper level, in some sense. So that's really cool. So you've mentioned a couple times also the psychedelic side of your research, and I know kind of research into psychedelics and as therapeutic and for healing work is having this kind of huge resurgence right now. So where does your work kind of fit into that?
I think we do fit into a pretty exciting space within that ecosystem. As I kind of mentioned before, I really believe in the idea of group-based and community-based work. And
Mhm.
it's not to again, not to say that individual work is not important, because I think it is also critical. But the individual work, I think, without the group-based or community or collective work, misses a very important component of this larger problem that we're speaking about.
Yeah.
And so, um, we are looking particularly at how can group and community-based form of psychedelic engagement and integration help facilitate greater social cohesion and social connection. How can it also potentially treat mental health symptoms,
Mhm.
and how can it help people survive things like burnout? Uh,
Yes.
and a lot of this work we do in collaboration with Berklee Retreats,
Mhm.
where I'm head of research, and that's a very interesting model because people are in a naturalistic environment,
Mhm.
um, and they're able to legally take psilocybin in a group setting with live music, with aspects of mindfulness, yoga, these breath work, and so it's a very integrative approach to group work for wellness and uh, to facilitate decreases in burnout. But the next step really is asking, can we leverage some of these same group and communities based models to treat things like PTSD and depression? And
Definitely.
towards the point that we talked about, can we use it for things like depolarization and
Mhm.
climate awareness, climate action? And so that's the sort of work that we're doing, is to ask all these different protocols and paradigms that we've developed that integrate the arts and things like music, mindfulness. how does adding psychedelics to that system really help amplify and facilitate some of that therapeutic work? And can we leverage some of the community-based and retreat-based work that's already going on in group settings to
Mhm.
facilitate treatments for mental health disorders and depolarization, containers?
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And so, I mean, just on a kind of really basic level, maybe you can tell us more the nuances of it. But, the research is indicating that psychedelics, especially psilocybin, which you mentioned, can kind of open up new neural pathways. And how do these retreats and kind of bringing together, psychedelics and music and group process, like, what is happening in the brain with that?
Yeah. And so we can look at different levels of analysis to understand what's
Mhm.
at the level of the individual neurons. We believe that psychedelics act on the serotonin 2A receptor, which is a very
Mhm.
particular receptor that allows for changes that happen in the neuron that allows it to then have increases in plasticity, meaning it's growing new connections, and that will change how that, neuron or group of neurons function. At
Mhm.
the network levels, the way that different parts of the brain often interact and send information to each other can be changed and often are changed under psychedelics, particularly at higher doses. And you can have new routing of information that hasn't been routed, in that way before.
Mhm.
And networks, parts of the brain that are now connected in terms of information flow in ways that they haven't been um, previously. And this can have really long lasting impact even after the initial dosing, where people can really engage in sort of new behavioral pathways and really laying down new neural circuitry to support it. And at the psychological level, we can have many different phenomenon that lead to sort of a reduced sense of egoic sense of self,
Mhm.
which becomes more expanded, and that experience can really psychologically be very healing for people to experience that. It also allows processing of certain memories and trauma, in ways that can be helpful, particularly in a facilitated context where there is preparation, an experience of the actual psychedelic, and then integration of that experience. And it does seem that those pieces together are really important
Mm,
for at least having
definitely.
therapeutic or, mm, uh, healing value. And so I think the big picture is that psychedelics are changing neural activity and activity in networks in ways that facilitate plasticity and allow the organism to create new pathways of cognition and behavior, that we can leverage, I think, for therapeutic benefit, but just also to for self development, right? To become a much fuller, freer version of oneself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, both like in the lab and in these retreats that you're involved with, let's say after an experience, like a psychedelic experience with a group, or just an experience with music mindfulness. Kind of circling back a little bit to the conversation about, depolarization and things like that. Like, do you notice a difference in, the kinds of conversations that people are engaging in after an experience like this, or the quality of dialogue, or just how people are interacting?
Yeah, I think this work, particularly when we start to engage with with psychedelics in group context, I think this can be very deep work in that
Mhm.
um it's very vulnerable. It can be very vulnerable, and
Sure.
it can be very intense. And
Mhm.
so I think by just that alone, the level of conversation, I think, really goes deep very quickly because we
Mhm.
are dealing with, I think, core elements of what it means to be human, core elements, excuse me, that could be like at the root of people's trauma, at the root of individuals' anxiety. When we think about um, one's being, how that's related to one's thoughts, how that's one's related to one's sense of self and what is real. These are like very, very fundamental parts of our human experience. And they all really are facilitated to come into our awareness during the psychedelic experience, particularly again within this context where there's been preparation and there's also integration, and that space is also facilitated and held in a certain way.
Mhm.
And so you do see people really making breakthroughs and getting to certain, I think, fundamental ground levels of awareness and understanding that can be really insightful, for them.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. And you mentioned also earlier, like, that, you're kinda looking at the effects of this, not just kind of in the moment, but for a certain amount of time
Yeah.
afterwards. And what are you kind of noticing there in terms of maybe longer term effects?
Yeah. And so some of this work I think is still too early to say any definitive
Yeah,
claims.
yeah.
But part of the idea and part of what we're seeing and the hypothesis is that when this work is engaged in a group setting,
Mhm.
particularly one that's held and facilitated, the long-term benefits will be the lasting benefits will be longer than when individuals are engaging in this by themselves
Yeah.
or not as a part of a group, and that community and group formation and increase in social connection that we see over the course of a retreat or over the course of some of our other arts-based integration, that enhancement in social connection and community actually helps to uh, integrate and facilitate a more long-lasting therapeutic, benefit, and that's sort of what we're working towards.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just thinking about this kinda, like, in my own experiences and, like, you can have a powerful individual experience that can stay with you for a long time and maybe inspire creativity in different ways, but even more powerful is a group experience, even shared with one other person or a few or maybe more people. There's, like, this kind of synergy that happens, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, anything else that's kind of top of mind for you at the moment in terms of your research, your music, or kind of what's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited just about the space that we're in with the integration of these different
Mhm.
pieces, and I think we're in a time where both the culture as well as the clinical community seems to be ready for it now.
Yeah.
I think about when I was in college or in med school or graduate school or studying, for my music fellowship, these things still felt very separate and there wasn't a very clear career path for me to
Yeah.
integrate them. But I would say that, within like the last 5 years, um, there seems to be both on the scientific community side as well as the general culture and even in the artistic community side, a real desire to integrate arts and health and to really see kind of the neuro arts field grow and
Yes.
bringing these different ways of expressing our total humanity really centrally into the conversation about how do we heal individually and collectively, and how do we use the arts to address real public health, concerns. And so for me, I'm really excited to be, one of the people that's like at the forefront of that and working with a lot of really amazing artists and scientists and policymakers to try to make this something that we can implement. Because I do think now we are on, we're on a time scale, we're on a timetable, right? I think
Yeah.
that we have to make certain changes as a society and as a species if we are going to survive the coming challenges. And I think on one hand, right, maybe we figure it out. Maybe we do come together in time. Maybe we do leverage these things and find the balance so that we can take that next step. And maybe this is the end of the road for our species as it
Right.
is,
We
right?
don't know
As it
yet,
is,
right?
right? And I think I would love it for it to be the former, and
Yeah.
that I'm optimist, so I'm hopeful, and
Me
that's what I aim
too.
for. But even if it's not, like, I would love for our species, if we are gonna go extinct, I would love for us to go extinct with some grace, with,
Yeah.
like, peace and, like, a spiritual understanding of what's happening to us versus a very anxiety-ridden, chaotic, end, right? So
Yeah.
either way, I would love for the ways that we evolve in this next stretch to be guided by a much more balanced, holistic, integrated view of the human and how all of these things actually work together, not in a way that separates biology from psychology and spirituality, but in a way that really understands that these are all an integrated system and or a set of integrated systems that are working and expressed, through our form. And so that message, as a physician scientist and also as an artist, is what I'm most excited to do, and to create the spaces where community can be built around that and really implementing that. That's what we have been doing, but I'm looking forward to really taking these next steps, um, to do that in an even more impactful, and holistic way.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful sentiment, and it kind of echoes some things I've been thinking about, and I think a lot of us who kind of, straddle academia and arts, and it's like maybe in the old days, we had to compartmentalize ourselves somehow. Like, okay, I'm a musician, but I'm a researcher, or professor, whatever. Now we can start to bring it all together in really meaningful ways. So, we're not sure what the outcome's gonna look like, but I think that's, like, a really beautiful sentiment. So, and kind of a great place to bring the conversation to a close. So, I like to end the podcast episodes with what I call like a creativity pro tip. It's something that people can take and kind of try out on their own. So, if maybe people don't have a chance to come to your lab or get to a show or a retreat, like what's something that they could do just on their own in the moment that might be helpful for exploring music mindfulness or just kind of mental health.
Yeah. So I think one very simple practice, I'll give two. So one, I think, really simple practice is taking time to just listen to what's around you.
Yeah.
Sometimes just in 10, 15 seconds, you just hear certain things that you weren't hearing before, and it's just a
Mhm.
reminder that there's so many things going on around us that our brains filter out. And sometimes just giving ourselves a moment to bring real attention to what we're hearing, what we're seeing, what we're feeling, can already just help to create some space and sort of reshape our experience of these moments. And then I think from a creative perspective, um, making the minimum amount of time possible and available for your creative act. So
Yes.
if you're, if you draw, if you paint, if you do, slam poetry, whatever it is, if it's 5 minutes, right, that you believe that's all I have to dedicate to my art today, put a time on for 5 minutes and just create something in that time. And you don't put any pressure on yourself that it has to be a masterpiece, has to be a finished work of art. Even if you write 3 lines of your next song, right? Or if you just outline a sketch of your next painting, but just give yourself 5 minutes. I've often found that when I'm really disciplined at this, it pretty much is never just 5 minutes. Like
Yeah.
I always actually end up having more time than that.
Yeah.
Just giving myself that time, I'm able to really just stay consistent and stay dedicated to that muse.
Yeah, I love that. It's like kind of micro bursts of creativity, if you will. Yeah, I love that. It's perfect. So, thank you so much, Dr.
No, for
AZA. It's
sure.
been so great to have you today. And if people want to learn more about your work, about your music, what are the best ways for them to find you and connect?
Yeah, for sure. So you can go to AZA the Messenger on Instagram, and you can find out stuff about music, personal stuff, science. LinkedIn, AZA Allsop. Often post a lot of things there. And then azalab.org has all of the research and amazing things that we're doing in that regard. And then the last website I'll give you all is azafortheculture.com, and you can find out a lot about the art and the movement that way too.
Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you again so much. It's been such a pleasure. I'm glad we got to do this today.
Yes, me too. Looking forward to some more.
Yeah, for sure. We'll have to circle back. and
Yeah.
do another convo at some point. Cool. Find and connect with us on YouTube and social media under Syncreate. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. We're recording today at Record ATX Studios in Austin with Dr. AZA joining us from the East Coast. The podcast is produced in collaboration with Mike Osborne at 14th Street Studios. Thanks so much for being with us, and see you next time.